Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money and the home as a team. Today, we welcome Dr. Jordan Grumet, author of The Purpose Code and host of the Earn and Invest podcast. Dr. Grumet was an internal medicine physician in private practice when he discovered the personal finance community. Since then, he left his clinical practice to pursue his passion for deep conversations about purpose, money, and life, which is the topic of today's show. Dr. Grumet, we are thrilled to have you here. I know you prefer to go by Jordan or Doc, so I got to go with Doc. Christian, what are you going to go with today? You going to go with Doc or Jordan?
I think Doc. It's putting me in my Back to the Future feelings.
That's exactly what I went with. And listeners, we are so thrilled to have Doc here, and we want to get straight into it because I've read his book, The Purpose Code, and it is outstanding. And we're here to talk about it, and we know that our listeners are going to get a lot out of this conversation. So, Doc, if you wouldn't mind, can you share with our listeners just a broad overview of what the book, The Purpose Code, is about?
So basically, I wrote my first book called Taking Stock. And the idea was, as a hospice doctor, I sat with people on their deathbeds and I learned a lot about life. And so what I wanted to do is teach people what the dying could tell us about money and life. And a big premise to that book was that we should put purpose first and then build a financial framework around it. And so I went on the road to market this book, and I was doing all sorts of conferences, and I get people who'd come up to me after the conference and tell me they were angry. And this I never expected. And the first time it happened, I'm like, this is a one-off. But I keep on getting people coming up to me angry, and they would look at me and they'd say, you keep telling me I need to find my purpose. I've been looking for my purpose forever. I have no idea what it is. I'm frustrated. I don't think there is a purpose. Please stop telling me to find my purpose. And so being a doctor, being a coach, being a writer, being a podcaster, I definitely was like, I need to dig into this. I need to go down the rabbit hole and figure out what is this issue with purpose people have. I did a bunch of research and I found really two things. One, purpose is associated with happiness, health, and longevity. Clearly, tons of studies. This is well accepted. On the other hand, other studies show that up to 91% of people at some point in their life got what's called purpose anxiety, this idea that purpose actually made them anxious or frustrated or depressed. That's a paradox. And so I wrote this book to answer that paradox. How can purpose be both the most important thing as well as be incredibly anxiety provoking? And my conclusion is that we think about purpose wrong. It's probably not one thing. It's probably at least two things. And one version is probably very healthy and causes happiness and longevity. And the other probably causes anxiety. And we just have to kind of reconfigure and reimagine what purpose is in our lives.
So excited to get into this with you today, Doc. So I imagine that there are some personal stories too behind, having been a hospice care doctor, discovering your own purpose. How did that change your life and your career?
Well, first and foremost, my sense of purpose changed. So when I was 7 years old, my father died suddenly. He had a brain aneurysm. He was rounding in the hospital because he was a doctor. He was a cancer doctor, an oncologist. And so after he died, being a 7-year-old, I saw everything through a very selfish lens because that's what 7-year-olds do. So I figured he must have died because I did something wrong. I wasn't enough. I didn't behave. Something went wrong. My way of dealing with this is I cosmically figured the answer was if I just became a doctor like him and walked in his footsteps, it would solve everything. And so becoming a doctor really became my sense of purpose. It became my sense of identity. I co-opted his version of purpose because I thought it would solve all my problems. And that was very joyful in the beginning. I mean, I was very excited about becoming a doctor. I relished the idea of going to medical school, eventually did in residency. But after I started practicing, I realized that it didn't really fit me. And I wasn't very comfortable with the identity. I'd go hang out with other doctors and I never made these great friends. I hated hanging out in the doctor's lounge. And in fact, I'd go to parties and I'd be embarrassed to tell people I was a physician. The reason why I was embarrassed is because this purpose and identity that I had claimed, that was my father's, I realized didn't suit me very well. And two things really happened at the time that changed all this. One is I serendipitously discovered financial independence and realized that I probably had enough money to start making more decisions based on purpose and identity and less based on my finances. But the other thing is I got deeper and deeper into hospice work, which I was doing as a side hustle to make a little extra money. But I was sitting with people on their deathbeds and hear them talk about their regrets. And, a major regret of the dying is that they never give themselves permission to do the things that are deeply important to them. And then they get to their deathbed and they realize it's too late. So I started looking at my own life and saying, well, I've been living this life as a doctor, but it clearly doesn't fill me up. I probably co-opted it from my father. Are there some things that would fill me up? And I realized that the things I do now, podcasting, writing, being an author, public speaking, those are all things that always filled me up and that I was trying to fit in the cracks and corners of my life because I thought they were hobbies. I didn't think it was what you did for a living. You're a doctor for a living. You're not a guy who sits in front of a microphone and talks about things like meaning and purpose. When I gave myself permission to go after the things I really loved and enjoyed, I found that my life got incrementally better. And some of that permission came from dealing with these hospice patients and really talking to them about their regrets.
I imagine that a lot of, your readers, listeners, your audience hears the kind of value proposition of purpose in your life and says, okay, great. How do I start? What are some first steps that folks can take to align their daily lives, their daily actions and habits with their true purpose in life? And especially, I'm interested to hear your thoughts, given our audience at Modern Husbands. We are working with, couples who are busy, usually dual income folks, dual career couples. And so when both partners are highly, career oriented, how can we work together as a team to align our team's actions towards our true purpose?
Well, first and foremost, let me pick apart what you said a little bit. This claim of true purpose, I think, is a false one. And I think when we say our true purpose, what we're really is building up these stakes that are so high that actually brings about the purpose anxiety. The truth of the matter is there's probably not one true purpose for most people. There are probably many different versions of purpose. Some may take more time and be more important to them, and some might be less important to them. And so first and foremost, purpose is not this exalted, big, audacious thing. It's actually the little things that we love doing every day. And so first and foremost, a lot of people say, well, how do I find my purpose? And I say, well, you don't really find your purpose. You build or create it. It's a very active process. But the truth of the matter is we have to find some of these inklings, some of these beckonings, these things that maybe excite us a little bit so we can build a life of purpose around it. And so those are two different questions. One is, how do I find those purpose anchors, those things to build purpose around? But the other question is, how do I fit that into my otherwise busy life? So first and foremost, there's an extensive conversation about how you find your purpose anchors, but there's some exercises we talk about in the book using a hospice life review. It's a good way of looking at a number of things in your life, including regrets. And regret actually often can be a purpose anchor when you're not on your deathbed, right? So if you're young and healthy, turning those regrets around and realizing you could build a life of purpose around those is a real simple way to start thinking about your purpose anchors. I talk about the art of subtraction. So at work, a lot of people go to work every day and they feel that their work is mediocre, or some people even loathe it. But if they really look at all the things they do in their work, if they write down all the responsibilities, all their activities, and they start slashing everything they don't like, usually somewhere on their paper, there's one or two things they do like. Like, I love it every Thursday. I come in and I stock the stock room and I love being orderly and organized. And that 2 hours that I'm doing this is my best part of my work week. Well, that can be a purpose anchor. So what do you love even in a job that you hate? There are other ways too. I often tell people to look at joys of childhood, right? So what did your childhood bedroom look like? What were the posters? What were the drawings? What were the trophies? Often as little kids, we pursue purpose very naturally. We get involved with things. We don't care about the goals. We lose track of time. But as we get older, we get more serious about school and education and career, and we drop a lot of those things we love. So a good way to find purpose anchors is just to go back and look at what you loved in childhood. And last but not least, a great way to find purpose anchors, if nothing else works, is to use the spaghetti method. Throw a bunch of things against the wall and see what sticks. That means trying things you don't normally try, hang out with people you don't normally hang out with, maybe making yourself a little uncomfortable. And if you enjoy any of those things, you could build a life of purpose around some of those. But the other question, which is a really difficult question, is we're busy people. We have a busy life. How do we start incorporating purpose into that? So first and foremost, I tell you that I don't buy that. We're busy people and it's a busy life. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics every few years does the American Time Survey, and they found that most Americans have 5 hours of free time a day. And in fact, people in lower socioeconomic classes have slightly more, up to 6 hours of free time a day. And so this idea that we don't have time, I think, is somewhat of an excuse. The other thing is a lot of people say, well, I don't have money, right? So we're both working. We're just trying to put food on the table. And so, of course, we don't have the privilege of thinking about purpose. But I always tell people that we make the mistake of thinking that money is the only tool available in living a life of purpose. And it is a very great, wonderful tool, but it's one of many. And a lot of times we have other things. For instance, we have our families, we have our communities, we have our skills, we have our youth, we have our energy. And so, Christian, you're a perfect example. You just had a baby and you're using a tool that's very important. You're using your family to get help when you have a baby at home and you have a newborn and you need someone to take some stress off of you so you can otherwise do whatever else you need to do. So we have all these other tools. So yes, it's not easy when you're exhausted and busy to start thinking about purpose, but I like to frame it this way. From the day we're born to the day we die, we have a set amount of time on this earth. And yes, you can do some things to increase that time, right? You can wear your seatbelt and not smoke and exercise. But generally, we're allotted a certain amount of time. And that time passes no matter what you do. You can't buy it. You can't sell it. You can't trade it. It passes. The only thing you can do is try to control the activities you're involved with as time is passing. And so winning the game is putting as many purposeful, joyful activities into those time slots of your life and getting rid of as many things as you loathe. And so from the day that we're, old enough to start thinking about this to the day we die, we should be looking at our calendar every week, looking at our schedule and thinking about, are we maximizing the things we love and getting rid of the things we loathe? And so your time clock on this earth doesn't care how busy you are. It doesn't care if you just had a baby. It doesn't care if there's not enough money in the bank account. Your time is passing. It really behooves you to start maximizing that calculus of filling more of your time with purposeful, joyful activities.
I love how you just laid out the formula for finding your purpose. And I think that's something that if you're listening right now, you should probably put your finger on your phone or your on your screen and maybe go backwards and listen again, because it was so important to understand. But I do have a question that just popped in my mind. You see all of this with such clarity. Was there a conversation that you had in your time at hospice treating parents with someone who jolted you into this recognition that we only have one life and we need to live it with purpose?
I mean, man, there's so many of those occasions. It's even hard to pin one down. Here's a great example. And this was a very difficult story. I took care of an elderly woman in her 80s who was having chronic medical problems, and she was declining over the years. And she had a 50-something-year-old daughter who had divorced, never had children, and had decided to dedicate the last 10 years to her mom. And so she had given up on a lot of her dreams. She had wanted to work and decided not to. She wanted to travel, decided not to. And so one day, her mom ends up sick and ends up in the emergency room. She is rushing to be by her mom's side. She's walking into the hospital, slips on some ice, and breaks her ankle. And so literally, I go to the emergency room. My patient's in one room, and then her daughter is in the next room. Her daughter has to have emergency surgery. I take care of the mom. I send the mom to a nursing home because she clearly didn't have enough support. But the daughter couldn't actually walk because she broke her ankle. So after she had surgery, we actually sent her to the nursing home, and they were literally side to side in each other's rooms. 2 nights later, this 50-something-year-old was relatively stubborn, and she decided to get up without help, although she had been told not to. She stumbled and hit her head and was dead within 12 hours. She had bleeding in her brain, etc. They took her to the hospital. They couldn't revive her. And I remember walking into the room and talking to the mother and breaking this heartbreaking news, because the mom knew she went to the hospital but didn't know what had happened, and telling her how her daughter had died. And the mom looked at me And she's like, the poor child spent the last 10 years taking care of me. And now she's gone before I have. And it was just that moment that made me realize that time waits for no one. Does that mean we shouldn't take care of our family members? Does that not mean that we shouldn't live in service of others? Of course not. I mean, you guys in your podcast talk about how we as husbands have to support our wives, and that means sometimes giving up on some of your hopes and dreams. But you can't defer it all. There has to be a middle ground. You have to work on yourself and your version of purpose, even as you're working on your family members and loving and caring for your spouse and kids. It's not either or, it's both. And so this was a stark reminder to me that I needed to live with this idea that death is always close, even as I'm walking this earth. The idea is memento mori, right? This idea that death is always there, even when we're alive and healthy. And that helps remind me that we can't always put these things off forever. Those things that are deeply important to us, why not think about them now? Why not work on them now, as opposed to putting them off forever?
As a Modern Husbands podcast listener, you recognize the importance of evidence-based advice from leading national experts for your marriage. That's why we know you will love our marriage toolkit. Nearly 50 national experts came together to provide bite-sized advice to manage the toughest topics couples face in managing money in the home as a team. Go to modernhusbands.com for your free preview of our marriage toolkit to start, strengthen, or rebuild your marriage. Once again, that's modernhusbands.com to sign up for your free preview of our marriage toolkit. Now back to the show.
I want to switch it up and talk a little bit about couples. So can you talk about shared purpose to the extent that there is one, and how couples can help one another cultivate their senses of purpose, both individually and together as a team?
Well, there are a few things to think about here. First and foremost, I make an argument in the book that other people can't be your purpose. And so it's wonderful if you live for your spouse. It's wonderful if you live for your kids. But the truth of the matter is we want to model this behavior, especially for our kids, that we do things that light us up, that bring us joy, independent of other people. We pursue a version of purpose because we want our kids to one day grow up and be able to do the same thing. And so if you teach your children, for instance, that either your spouse or those kids are your sole version of purpose, what if your children don't get married? What if they can't have kids themselves? What if they don't want kids? Then what modeling have they received about living a good life? So it's really important that we pursue our individual sense of purpose, things that light us up, and we model that behavior for our friends, our family, our spouses, and our kids. We want to give them permission to do the same thing. Now, yes, couples can have a shared sense of purpose if things light them up together, if they love doing things together, if they love the process, regardless of the outcome, if they like building together or traveling together or, searching for antiques together. Any of that can be a shared sense of purpose. But it's also incumbent upon us, just like we do with careers, to also give our spouses some space and time to really explore their own deeper sense of purpose. What lights them up? What do they enjoy doing? And we as their spouse want to give them the time to do that, right? We want to take the kids on a Saturday so they can go antiquing if that really lights them up. We want to, watch the kids at nighttime so they can work on that novel if that's the thing that really brings them joy. So I think just like everything else in a couple or as a spouse, we both have to enjoy our shared sense of purpose, especially if we dig the same things, but also give each other space to grow individually.
As you're sharing these essential tips for purpose, and really purpose that leads to happiness, I can't help to think about the amount of time that so many people spend on like social media and how that might influence our perception of purpose. So what strategies would you recommend for individuals who do enjoy social media? So let's assume the advice is not to just get off social media. But if you're on social media, how can you use it in a way that supports rather than detracts from your sense of purpose.
So remember, I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, this idea that there's kind of a good version of purpose associated with longevity, health, and happiness. And then there's a worse version of purpose, which is associated with anxiety. So let me give a name to those types of purpose. Big P purpose is big, audacious purpose. It's very goal oriented and often causes us to feel anxiety because many times we actually don't have the agency to fulfill the sense of purpose. Think about becoming a billionaire or becoming president or being a major league baseball player. These are all things that sound great. And in America, we say if you can dream it, you can build it. But the truth of the matter is a lot of times we don't actually have the skill set, the knowledge, the time, the genetics, and the luck to get to these places. So that's kind of big P purpose. Little P purpose, the more healthy version of purpose, is all about the process. It's doing things that you enjoy doing regardless of the goal. And because there's so many possibilities of things you enjoy doing, it's very abundant. Whereas big P purpose is very scarcity mindset oriented. It's kind of lose or win, winner takes all mentality with big P purpose, where little P purpose is there's tons to go around for everyone. So let's talk about social media. Society in general, which social media is a product of, often tries to get us to co-opt other people's version of purpose. So if we think about social media, who's on social media? It's mostly influencers and advertisers. And so they're going to show you a version of often what is called big P purpose. They're going to show you the six-pack abs. They're going to show you the people running the 8-figure businesses. They're going to show you people who are traveling the world and are in a different country every day. And the reason why they're doing this is not to help you be more happy. They're doing it because they want to sell you something. They want you to follow them. They want you to buy things from their advertisers. Marketing is the same thing. When we used to watch TV and all those commercials were on there before we could click through them, they are giving you a view, an image of purpose that's often big, audacious, and hard to reach. And it really frustrates most of us because we're never going to get there. Like most of us don't have the genetics to have six-pack abs. We don't have the time. We don't have the money to hire the trainer. We don't have the time to be as careful with what we eat. It's just not our reality. And so social media can be damaging because it sells us a version of purpose that is meant to get us to buy something, to be consumers, and often doesn't actually serve our sense of happiness. So how do we get around this? The best way is to use social media for personal connections. Use it to connect to your friends, to stay in touch with people. But if you use it as aspiration, if you use it to look at what could my version of purpose to be, it's going to sell you something that probably won't make you happy.
Have you heard of the concept of the vertical expansion of the reference group?
No, explain that to me.
It's a very nerdy concept, but basically when you're scrolling through Instagram or TikTok or whatever social media, you will be scrolling past your close friends and family in the same context as you're scrolling past Kim Kardashian, Steph Curry, Oprah, right? Like, these big exalted figures. And through the process of, repetitively scrolling through that, you start to see as your reference group, meaning like, what is success? What is purpose in this context of this conversation, in this big exalted, pedestal? Like success is Steph Curry, is Oprah, is Kim Kardashian. It's not, your uncle and aunt, who are spending time with their kids and going apple picking or what, having a joyful day out together. It's more, there feels like there's more pressure to reach some sort of ideal.
The problem is, and why this is so toxic goes even deeper, and it has to do with our sense of enough. And I think to really understand this, you have to parse out the difference between meaning and purpose. So a lot of times I'll say that happiness is meaning and purpose. And a lot of people think they're the same thing, but they aren't. Meaning is about our past, and it's our cognitive thoughts about our past. It's the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. People who have a good sense of meaning and are generally happy tell themselves a hero story. So they say, I was young, I had all sorts of trauma and problems, but I was able to get past them, and that brought me to where I am today. So I'm going to do a really good job in the future, and I'm going to continue to be enough. This is a journey to enough. And when you have a good sense of meaning, you realize I was always enough, and that's why I grew and expanded and learned. People who don't have a good sense of meaning and tend to be unhappy are people who tell themselves a victim story. Like, I had this trauma, these bad things happened to me, and it hindered me, and I could never catch back up. So they come to the present and future feeling not enough and like something was always getting in their way. So they're not usually very happy. That's meaning. It's about your past and it's about stories. Purpose is about your present and future and is about actions. It's about doing the things that light you up today, that make you joyful. Here's the problem. You need both meaning and purpose to be happy. And when we scroll Instagram and TikTok and we see all these people achieving these big things, we tell ourselves a story. We say, if I can just achieve the same thing that this influencer is achieving, I will be enough. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to purpose your way to enough. You're creating purpose in your life, and that purpose is to answer a question, am I enough? Yes or no? Well, if I reach this goal, I'm enough. But that's not how it works. If you want to feel enough, you can't look to purpose. You can't look to the present future. You've got to look to the past and tell yourself better stories about yourself. And once you get that good sense of meaning, you can move into the present and future and have a very joyful, abundant sense of purpose. Social media is trying to do it backwards. It's taking people who don't feel they're enough and it's trying to sell them a product and trying to get them to strive for that product by buying something or engaging in some activity. But here's the problem, and we see this all the time. People who don't have a good sense of meaning, even if they reach their goals, even if they get the six-pack abs or get the 8-figure business or do all these things, they're still not happy because they still don't feel enough. There's some great examples of this out in popular culture. Steve Jobs was a great example. He made all this money. He created all this amazing tech. Did he look happy? No, he looked kind of miserable. He had a meaning problem. He most likely had to go back and figure out, okay, I was adopted. What did that mean? What story do I tell myself about not being loved or wanted by my parents? How could I turn that story around and realize that my parents were just regular human beings who had troubles and had to give me to another family, but that other family was loving, and look at how much I accomplished and what a hero I became in this very difficult situation. Elon Musk is another one. Elon Musk has more money than God and has created some of the coolest, greatest stuff out in the world. But does he look particularly happy? No. He wants more money and he wants to create more great things. Probably because he's struggling with this idea of enough, which is left over from asserting a better version of meaning about his parents, about his society, about how he grew up. And so this is the problem with social media. If you're looking to social media to figure out your purpose, you probably have a meaning issue and don't feel enough and have to deal with that first. Because purpose is so much easier than that. There's no way to fail at purpose. It's just trying things you love the process of doing and engaging them and allowing them to light you up. And once you do that, that connects you to other people because like a moth to the flame, they see you lit up and they want to be engaged with you. They want to collaborate with you. They want to create with you. If they know something you don't, they want to teach you. If they want to learn something from you, they want to be your student. And it's actually the community and the connections that bridges purpose with happiness. And there are tons of studies that also show that. You can't get any of that from social media.
You can get that from listening to the Modern Husbands podcast and reading Doc's book, The Purpose Code. Don't get it twisted. Okay. So in the book, speaking of which, you talk about legacy as a component of purpose. How do you think people should be thinking about legacy when they're in the thick of it, right? You talked about earlier how folks are busy and, dual career couples, obviously are busy, but that's not an excuse for, not going out and trying to practice this, cultivation of purpose. So how does that extend to legacy? Like how do we think about legacy when we're in the thick of, living life together, careers, investing, all the rest?
This is the biggest argument I get for big P purpose. Big, audacious purpose. The reason why people go after it is they want legacy. They want impact. Like, man, I want to become president. I want to cure cancer. I want to do all these things because this is how I'm going to have big impact and legacy. The problem is those things are so hard to achieve. Almost everyone's going to fail, and only, a small percentage are going to actually achieve those things. So the bigger question is, does little p purpose, process-oriented purpose, lead to legacy and impact? And my answer is clearly yes, and it's through something called generational growth. Now, we've all heard of generational trauma, right? Things that our family members pass on to us that causes us to act in ways that isn't necessarily good for us. But we rarely talk about the exact opposite, generational growth, where family members pass on good things to us and we thrive because of it. So let me tell you a story I think that really demonstrates this impact and legacy portion and really gets to families and couples too. So I'm going to tell you the story of my maternal grandfather. So my maternal grandfather died in the 1960s, 10 years before I was born. Never met the guy. He had a very strong sense of purpose. He loved math, not because it made him money, not because it changed the world. He loved math because he loved math and it just lit him up. Because of that, he became a CPA, an accountant. Now, when my mom was young in the 1950s, a little girl, she would sit on his lap and he would bring out his spreadsheets and he would show her all the boxes and the numbers he put in, and it would totally excite him. And because he modeled that behavior, my mom did what all little kids do. She tried on that identity of someone who loves math like her dad, and she found that she loved math too. So she eventually became a chemist, but after that, she herself became a CPA. Now, when I was a little kid, I had a learning disability and couldn't read. In fact, while all my friends were on their basic beginning readers, I was coloring in coloring books. I would have thought all was lost and that I didn't have the intellectual ability, but there was one thing. You see, I had learned from my mother about math, and I had tried on that identity, and I liked it too. And so I was really good at math. So I was at the bottom of the barrel when it came to reading. I was getting the top math score. So I knew that I must be okay. I eventually got over that learning disability and became a doctor. And I remember in my early years practicing, there was one day I went to the hospital and this guy came in and he kept coming in over and over again, severely dehydrated at death's doorstep. And we'd hydrate him, but then it would happen again. And I looked at his labs and I realized there was a mathematical connection between two of his labs. And I used that to diagnose him with a rare disease, one of those strange rare diseases that all he needed was the right medication. We gave him that medication. He stopped being dehydrated, stopped coming into the hospital. He was a pastor at a local church, and he would take in runaway kids. He would give them social services, give them food. If they were old enough, he would give them a job. And so let's think about this in the eye of generational growth. So my maternal grandfather, who died in the 1960s, by pursuing his version of purpose, is changing people's lives 60 years later, hundreds of miles away, where a kid is stepping into a church and getting the help they need, all because he pursued his unique version of purpose. Like a stone dropped in the ocean, his purpose displaced just a touch of water that became a wave. And that wave at times added to other waves to become huge and mighty, and then at other times dissipated to become the smallest of waves. But now 50, 60 years later, those waves are still hitting beaches in various places and changing lives. That's generational growth. That's pursuing our version of purpose and affecting the people around us. And that effect ultimately leads to impact and legacy. So when you're talking about couples and families, it's not curing cancer. It's not making $1 billion. It's doing those unique things that light you up and sharing it with the world. And that's how you're going to make your spouse's life better. That's how you're going to make your kids' life better. That's how you're going to give them permission to do the things that light them up. And when they do that, they're going to build connection and communities. They're going to affect the people around them. And just like my maternal grandfather, long after they're gone, the effects of their good works are going to continue. And so I think we can focus on big P purpose if we want, but our likelihood of succeeding is exceedingly small. But if we focus on little p purpose, most likely we're going to affect the people around us, and it eventually will have global impact.
Hell yeah. Oh my gosh. I don't know about you guys. I'm ready to paint the house or something. I don't know. Clean the windows for the first time in several months. But wow, that's beautiful. Your analogy of the wave too is
Yeah.
It's profound. It's profound to use the ocean metaphor. because it's not as if your maternal grandfather, pursued creating a tsunami.
Yeah. No, he's in no history books. You will not see his name in any history book. In fact, only the fact that I'm telling these stories now, these are the only reasons anyone even mentions his name. His name was Morris Adler. His name probably hadn't been spoken for the last 25 years. But now I'm speaking it because he's still here. His legacy remains.
Beautiful. Let's turn towards wrapping up. Where can folks purchase the book, The Purpose Code, and where can folks find your work, your voice elsewhere?
The best place to go is jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. There you can purchase both of my books, Taking Stock and The Purpose Code, as well as see all the places I create content. The major one is the Earn and Invest podcast, but I also do the Purpose Code Substack. There is a medical blog and a financial blog that I used to write at for years there too. So you'll find links to everything at jordangrumet.com.
I think this is one of those episodes that I know I'll listen to again and again, because there's so much depth to what you had to say today that is beyond kind of typical surface level advice that is easily applicable in our lives right now, right? I mean, this is going to require, I think, for some of us, just a little bit of soul searching. But if there is one thing that our listeners can do in their lives right now, something that is reasonably simple, reasonably actionable, that you want to leave us with today, what would that be?
We've been sold this story that purpose is scarce. And so what I want to leave people with is purpose is abundant and it's everywhere around you. And it is not some pie in the sky thing. It's actually something very tactile. Figure out what you like, what lights you up, what you like the process of doing, regardless if it feels selfish or not, and go for it. Build a life of purpose around that. Find an activity you like and do it. It's that simple. It's abundant. We've sold you a false set of goods. Purpose is not hard and it's not far away. It's right there. And most likely deep down inside, you know what feels purposeful to you. You just have to have the courage to start building that life around it.
A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcast, give us a rating, and share the Modern Husbands podcast with others. Doing so goes a long way in growing our reach. And join your fellow Modern Husbands and have links to our podcasts, articles, and other resources to manage money in the home as a team sent to your inbox every 2 weeks by subscribing to our newsletter at modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.